On this Sunday night, back to school with new COVID rule concerns and confusion, with some provinces dropping isolation and mask requirements.
Current levels across the country are 5 to 10 times higher.
The new year could be off to a precarious start, plus missed vaccinations.
For some of them, it felt less than 1%.
The pandemic's impact that could be felt decades from now. Interest rate hike anxiety, with another bump expected this week. Home affordability takes another hit. And
Mar-a-Lago was a travesty of justice.
What the Mar-a-Lago raid could mean for Donald Trump's influence and his White House ambitions.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with breaking news out of Saskatchewan. Police are looking for 2 suspects after a horrific stabbing spree. 10 people have been killed and more than a dozen others have been injured in multiple locations. A manhunt is now underway for 2 suspects identified as Damien Sanderson and Myles Sanderson. Police say some of the victims appear to have been targeted, but others were stabbed at random. The attacks happened in several locations, including James Smith Cree Nation and the village of Wheldon. Officers say the suspects were last spotted shortly after noon local time in Regina. The suspects may be traveling in a black Nissan Rogue with Saskatchewan license number 119 MPI. A province-wide dangerous person alert has been issued and extended into Alberta and Manitoba.
Given the fact that they are in a vehicle, we can't say with 100% certainty where they are right now. And we believe it's prudent to notify the residents of those provinces that there is a possibility they could have traveled to those locations and making them aware of the current situation that we're dealing with.
Police say the suspects are considered armed and dangerous. Anyone with information is asked to contact police. This Labor Day weekend marks the end of summer and a third pandemic back-to-school season. Despite higher vaccination rates, indicators are COVID-19 will surge again. And the biggest concerns may be in Ontario, where most pandemic restrictions have been lifted. As Ross Lord reports, some feel we may be letting our guard down too soon.
It's now an annual anxiety. How to conduct classes safely without making the COVID-19 pandemic worse.
I have 2 kids under the age of 5, and providing them with virtual schooling is not easy. And so getting them into a school setting where they can be there continuously over the coming school year, to me, is really important.
Fahad Razak is not just a parent, he's an epidemiologist, and he's worried wastewater indicators suggest another increase in COVID-19 is coming.
Current levels across the country relative to just a year ago are 5 to 10 times higher, depending on the test you're looking at.
Razak says it's too early for Ontario's decision to remove isolation requirements for those who become infected, fearing it could lead to asymptomatic staff and students returning to schools while still contagious. A view shared by the Union for Ontario high school teachers and other school staff.
We should be celebrating right now going back to school face to face, but it's being a little bit clouded by the fear around COVID.
Offsetting some of that fear is Canada approving an updated COVID-19 vaccine to target the first highly contagious Omicron variant. And Ontario is urging anyone with new or worsening symptoms to stay home until their symptoms improve for at least 24 hours. Some provinces and territories are still recommending masks in classrooms and other crowded spaces, even if they're no longer mandatory.
If they're ill, especially with new cold or flu-like symptoms, that they need to stay home. And not just go off to school and arrange for testing for COVID as appropriate.
Everyone is tired of the pandemic. No one wants to hear what medical experts say remains true, that with so many swirling variables, what happens next in the COVID-19 equation is impossible to figure out. Ross Lord, Global News.
COVID-19 vaccines have been critical in saving lives, our economy, and a return to a more normal way of life. But other vaccination rates have fallen during the pandemic. Families put routine medical checkups on hold, visiting their doctors only for urgent matters. That means many children are now behind on other important immunizations. Karen Lieberman reports on the push by this country's healthcare professionals to get those kids up to date.
As children return to classrooms across the country, they may be missing more than the summer break.
There's a huge gap. All those kids that normally get vaccines in grade 7, they didn't.
The COVID-19 pandemic led to a lag in routine doctor visits and immunizations.
So we have this massive catch-up to do.
In Ontario, the number of 12-year-olds vaccinated against meningococcal disease, hepatitis B, and human papillomavirus decreased dramatically in the last school year. Family physician Dr. Noah Ivers says a simple shot in the arm protects against these vaccine-preventable diseases.
Hepatitis, a cause of liver failure and liver cancer. We have a meningitis vaccine, and we have one that prevents cervical cancer and anal cancer.
In Toronto, a meningitis outbreak left one person dead, 2 others ill.
Meningococcal infection makes people get very sick very quickly, and you can die. Human papillomavirus and hepatitis B don't kill people right away now. They will be killing people from cervical cancer and liver cancer in decades.
Experts say vaccine hesitancy isn't to blame for the backlog, rather interruptions to in-person learning.
Normally, if uptake of these vaccines is in the 65 to 80% range, for some of them it fell to less than 1%.
Dr. Jahu and the team from 19 to 0, a nonprofit made up of academics and public health experts, among others, hope to improve vaccine uptake, pointing to results of a survey they conducted, which found most parents agreed it's important for their children to get the HPV vaccine, but less than half were aware of which vaccines are given in grade 7.
They don't recognize that they are as important for boys as they are for girls. Certainly we think a lot about cervical cancer, but HPV is actually one of the leading causes of head and neck cancers as well. And I think a lot of parents don't know that.
That's right.
As students catch up in the classroom, doctors hope they will also get caught up on vaccines. Karen Lieberman, Global News, Toronto.
Canadians are seeing the highest inflation rates in 4 decades. The Bank of Canada is expected to hike interest rates again this week in an effort to stabilize the economy. Global's Brittany Rosen explains why the move is needed and who'll feel it the most.
High gas prices, high food prices, high house prices. Strapped for cash, the cost of living has become unbearable for the average Canadian.
We've been seeing inflation running at the highest in 40 years.
While inflation has peaked, it remains steep, sitting at 7.6% in July. The Bank of Canada is widely expected to hike interest rates again on Wednesday by up to 0.75 percentage point in an effort to stabilize inflation.
There's still a long way to go, and so increasing interest rates is the greatest way of achieving that mandate and bringing it down.
While the higher cost to borrow money is expected to cool inflation, homeowners up for a mortgage renewal or those with variable rates will likely be hit with sticker shock.
That could essentially mean, especially on some of these mega mortgages, a few extra $100 coming out of your bank account every single month.
On the flip side, experts predict the move will help make life more affordable, especially for those trying to enter Canada's scorching hot real estate market. Housing prices have been exponentially high from coast to coast, with double-digit price increases since the start of the pandemic.
Part of the solution is get the interest rates up to cool the economy. Homeownership is very sensitive to interest rates, much more sensitive than buying a cell phone or a laptop, because real estate costs so much money.
There are signs of things starting to cool already. The latest numbers from August showing housing sales dropped by a whopping 40% in Vancouver and 34% in Toronto last month, an indicator that house prices are also starting to decline.
The predictions are the upcoming rate hike would be second to last. We could see another one next month. As for a potential recession, some experts say it is possible, although if it were to happen, it would likely be mild. Brittany Rosen, Global News, Toronto.
To the situation in flood-stricken Pakistan, engineers have intentionally breached the country's largest freshwater lake to release rising waters. The diversion has displaced up to 100,000 people, but it's hoped it will protect about 500,000 people who live in nearby towns. More rain is predicted to hit the southern part of the country in the coming days. More than 1,300 people have been killed and more than 33 million others have been affected by historic flooding. In Ukraine, several regions have come under Russian fire again, shattering the lives of people who live there. New video shows the horrific conditions Ukrainians are enduring. Emergency services in Kharkiv released these images of firefighters rescuing a kitten after a rocket attack on a restaurant and hotel. The animal was said to be shaken but okay. And look at this close call in central Ukraine. A driver narrowly missed an explosion. It happened a split second before the car reached the intersection. Further south, airstrikes hit a family clinic and a power line in the port city of Mykolaiv. And the clinic's pediatric department is in ruins and unable to treat children. For the first time since the raid on his Florida estate, former U.S. President Donald Trump spoke at a political rally, and he didn't hold back, blasting the FBI, the reasons for the search, and U.S. President Joe Biden. And as Jennifer Johnson explains, Trump told his supporters the Department of Justice investigation won't stop him from becoming America's president again.
With supporters cheering him on, former President Donald Trump launched a blistering attack against U.S. President Joe Biden and the FBI after federal investigators confiscated boxes of top-secret documents from his Florida home.
The shameful raid and break-in of my home, Mar-a-Lago, was a travesty of justice that made a mockery of America's laws, traditions, and principles.
The former president then took direct aim at the current president, who he may face in a 2024 bid for the White House.
The Biden administration invaded the home of their chief political opponent, who is absolutely destroying him and everyone else in the polls. I hate to say it.
The White House maintains the Department of Justice is independent from the Biden administration and that President Biden only learned of the FBI raid after it happened. But Trump was right in saying he's leading all of the Republican presidential hopefuls in most polls, despite his controversial actions.
This raid in their house, I really think, was a very political move, and it comes off very political.
I believe there's another witch hunt against him. He'll be elected president again, because we the people are going to vote him back in.
But investigators claim Trump refused multiple legal requests to turn over the highly sensitive documents and now could face charges including espionage and obstruction of justice, potentially stopping any future White House run.
These are all serious crimes that could get the former president criminally charged and incarcerated.
What influence Trump still has over his party may be evident in the midterm elections, just over 60 days away. The president has endorsed several candidates, including 2 at this rally, but whether his support still carries enough weight to win remains to be seen. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Coming up, the trial begins for the horrific terror attack that claimed 86 lives. It was the scene of an horrific attack that left 86 people dead. A man in Nice, France, deliberately drove a truck through crowded streets before police shot and killed him. Now, 6 years later, 8 people accused of helping the driver are set to go on trial. And as Mike Armstrong reports, the victims' families will be watching closely.
There was never a moment, Jean-Claude Hubler says, when he didn't know exactly what was happening. Hubler was on the beach in Nice, July 14, 2016, and heard a loud noise on the street. Right away, he says, he knew it was an attack.
J'ai regardé et j'ai tout de suite compris que c'était un attentat.
Hubler is now the president of a group called Life for Nice. It's an association representing victims and their families. Hubler himself didn't lose anyone, but he lived through it.
C'est dur.
Hubler says it was hard. He held a woman's hand as she took her last breath, and there were others dead and dying all around. More than 450 people were injured and 86 killed. The weapon, a 19-ton cargo truck driven by a 31-year-old Tunisian man. He was eventually shot by police. ISIS would claim responsibility. It had called on followers wherever they lived to attack civilians. Family members and neighbors of the driver said he'd been radicalized in the weeks before the attack. Now, there were arrests in the days following. Well, Monday, some of those people will go on trial. 7 men and 1 woman will be tried in this Paris courtroom. It was specially built for another terror trial. 20 people were found guilty in June for their roles in the November 2015 Bataclan attacks. Now, only 3 suspects in the Nice attack face terror-related charges. Prosecutors say they helped the driver obtain weapons and rent the truck. The 5 others are accused of arms trafficking and helping indirectly. Hubler says some of the families hope the trial helps them move on in their healing, but he says others are still too angry for it to make a difference. There's also disappointment the man who was behind the wheel never faced justice. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
Ahead, how French language issues could tip the balance in the next federal election. More than half of Quebec residents believe the use of French across the country is under threat. That's according to internal government polling commissioned by the Prime Minister's office and obtained by Global News. That belief alone may pose a threat to the Liberal government's chances of winning the next election. Our chief political correspondent David Akin explains.
Days before the beginning of the Quebec provincial election, Statistics Canada had some bad news. The latest census data revealed that the proportion of French speakers has declined everywhere in Canada, including in Quebec. That's a data point that pushed language to the center of that election.
Yes, absolutely. So language is always a significant issue in Quebec.
Incumbent Premier François Legault is miles ahead in the polls, and so if he needs someone to blame about the decline of French, well, it will not be his provincial opponents.
The answer is Justin Trudeau, right? And it's the federal government.
Jan Plante was a top political aide to ministers in the Harper government, and he's played key roles in fighting federal campaigns in Quebec.
What I expect is that we will see Premier Legault more and more talking about Justin Trudeau and the federal government and asking Quebecers for another strong mandate so that we can continue to be strong, facing Ottawa to protect our language, protect our identity.
The Trudeau Liberals have won 3 elections largely based on strong support in Quebec, but if that Quebec support wavers, and it could over language policy, well, that's trouble for the Liberals.
They can't afford to start losing ground in Francophones communities, not only in Quebec, but all across Canada.
And could make victory for the Conservatives easier.
Federal Liberals are vulnerable on language and on Quebec identity more generally.
That's why the internal polling from last April was crucial for the Trudeau government, to ensure that they are on the right track with what Quebecers want done to boost French language use in the rest of the country. 60% of Quebecers want increased funding for post-secondary institutions outside of Quebec that offer instruction in French. 60% of Quebecers want more money for French immersion in the rest of the country, and 56% want funding to help entrepreneurs do business in French in the rest of Canada.
The anxiety about the future of French, not only in Quebec, but elsewhere in Canada, is something that is, featured in that data.
The poll also said 65% of Quebecers said guaranteeing the equality of French and English right across the country should be a top federal priority. Now, the Trudeau government promised to do that with an overhaul to the Official Languages Act, and that overhaul will be on Parliament's agenda when MPs return to the House of Commons later this month. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
Next, a new library for Vancouver that's about so much more than books.
With control, her shot high, her second of the game.
Condolences to our southern neighbors tonight after Team Canada beat Team USA again for the top prize at hockey's Women's World Championship final. The two rival women's teams faced off in a rematch after Canada previously outscored the Americans both in last year's final and the Olympic gold medal game earlier this year. Canada's women came out victorious once more tonight with a final score of 2-1. A brand new library has just opened its doors in Vancouver, and it's like no other the city has ever seen. It's called the Vancouver Black Library, and the UBC student behind the project says it's bigger than books. She hopes the new space will start a new chapter for the city's Black community. Paul Johnson reports.
Soaking up the ambience in Vancouver's newest culture space. For Maya Preshon, this is a dream turned reality.
It happened definitely sooner than I could have imagined.
Rewind back to the middle of winter when Maya told us about her vision of a library that would tell the story of Vancouver's Black community. At the time, she had no location, no funding, just the moxie of a university student who wanted to do something. And what a doer she is.
In the 70s, there was a neighborhood that was a community hub for Black people in Vancouver, and that was Hogan's Alley, and it was dismantled to make way for city infrastructure.
Overlooked and unknown to many, East Vancouver's Hogan's Alley had its roots in the Black men who worked as stewards on the trains that came to nearby Pacific Central Station. Jimi Hendrix's grandmother lived there, and musicians like Nat King Cole and Louis Armstrong would eat at its restaurants when they came through town. The city's role in demolishing it for the Georgia Viaduct is now a lesson in what not to do.
It was the kind of tenor of the time. That was just how they viewed inner cities as blight. They viewed ethnic enclaves as something to get rid of, not something to embrace.
I would just like to say thank you.
Hogan's Alley is just one of the stories you can learn about at the Vancouver Black Library, now operating in a building full of art spaces in Chinatown. Everyone is welcome, and you'll find books by Black authors about all kinds of Black stories. All available thanks to Maya and her volunteers, and finished in time so she can get back to class at UBC.
It's all just crowdfunding, crowd support, knowledge from the community, contributions from the community.
What are the chances we'll be hearing about Maya Preshon again? Paul Johnson, Global News.
What an accomplishment. That's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Colleen Christie. Tonight's Your Canada is this rainbow near Agassiz, BC. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Eric Sorensen will be at the anchor desk tomorrow. Good night.